We're live.
Are you living someone else's life? That is the question for today's episode. How do we know we're actually living the life that we have written for ourselves? Most of us probably don't. So, we're going to be exploring Neville Goddard's work again today. Neville Goddard said the world is your self pushed out. But what if that self has been pushed out isn't actually yours? So, if you've been a fan of Neville Goddard for some time, you know that his core phrase in all of his teachings is I am, to live from I am. But the difference between living from an I am, for example, just saying I am abundant versus actually having the identity of someone that is abundant, these are two very different things. And today we're going to be exploring all of the ways that intergenerational trauma clouds our true identity. And we have a wonderful show for you today. Michael and Bernadette are going to be walking us through some things, and Bernadette also has a meditation for us at the end. So by the end, you'll have 3 practical tools that you can use and a guided process for stripping the inherited state and stepping into your authentic self. So we're going to kick that off today with Michael. And Michael, I think you have some things to tell us about the inherited I am and the state you were born into.
Thanks, Ruschelle. And absolutely, when we arrive at Neville Goddard's work about manifesting the life that we desire, we start making these I am statements, but we very rarely to pause and think that our current life is built up of a whole pile of unconscious I am statements. And Neville writes, the past still exists and it gives and still gives its results. And this is this accumulation of past I am, which is a past set of beliefs, and it's still just chugging around like a machine, producing the same results that it's ever produced. But Neville actually gives us a clue that we really need to go back and find the origins of these I am statements wherever they are. And he writes, man must go back in memory, seek for and destroy the causes of evil, however far back they lie. And the thing with the Ancestral Healing Center is that what we bring to this question is looking back before our own lives. Now, it's interesting that he uses the word evil there, and I don't read that as being a moral statement. To me, what he's saying there is that you're living backwards, because evil is live backward, literally the word live backwards. He's saying you're going the wrong way. You're not using your mind as you're supposed to be using it. So generational trauma is basically an inherited state of I am consciousness, which is a set of assumptions about who you are, what's possible, what kind of life you can live, and what it's okay or not okay for you to be doing, that typically these go unquestioned. And a lot of these I am statements come out of our family narrative. Now, in actual fact, we have 2 family narratives. And one is the family narrative that we know, which is the things we know about our family. But there's a second family narrative, which is the unspoken stories in our family. It's the silences. It's the things that went wrong that nobody wanted to talk about. It's the stillborn child that doesn't show up on the family tree. It's the court case that's not mentioned anywhere. And all of these things are creating I ams at a lower level of consciousness and are reproducing themselves as lived reality. And the reason why ancestral healing is so powerful is because it's not generic. Once we start diving into the reality of the family record, both the record that can be found in genealogical records and census data and so on, and also start diving into the feelings, we arrive at specific patterns and not generic ones. And we arrive at the child named after a failed relative, all of these different things that happened in the story, the family business that failed, the mother who walked out of the family and disappeared. All of these things start to come to life, and they are part of our I am. So the inherited family narrative is a collection of I am statements that we absorbed before we had the language or the cognition to question them. I'm the difficult one, I'm the underachiever, one that really resonates with me, I'm the carrier of the family's shame. And by doing the ancestral healing work, we start to uncover these old I ams which need to be released, as Neville tells us, in order to make way for a newer and cleaner and more abundant I am statement. Ruschelle or Bernadette, any comments on that?
I think for me, it is, Neville is fairly new to me. I've known a little bit about him. And when we first started to realize that there was this connection across ancestral healing, I was kind of amazed, because we often think when we are researching something that we're the first one to come up with the idea, but when we look back and really do some research, we see that this information, this understanding of how important our ancestral connection is, has been there for a very long time. And Neville is definitely somebody who has given us a sturdy base to look at as we explored in our lifetime.
Yeah, and for so many years I was incorporating Neville's work with ancestral healing, and I wasn't conscious, I guess, that I was doing that. So the one thing that I think anyone who's done genealogy or any sort of historical work, we know that this is the root of our identity, our present identity today. So, the next part that we're going to go into is reading your inherited scripts. And those scripts are essentially the I ams that we inherited from our family, whether that was parented through us or genetically passed down through us. And one of the ways that I like to describe that is these intense feelings. I remember as a 20-something, I had these intense feelings of grief and guilt, like that I was very, very guilty of something. But I'd not done anything. I mean, I was just starting my life. And so, looking back, I can clearly see that was a myriad of guilts, right? That wasn't mine. A survivor guilt of being an immigrant, a guilt of leaving my homeland, like just a layered story around guilt. So that's what we're going to jump into in this section. We're going to talk about 3 ways, diagnostic ways, that we can say, hey, this is probably an I am, an identity that didn't start with us. And Bernadette, I think you're going to walk us through the namesake lens,
which is such an important part of who we are. We all, it's the one thing that we seem to own when we are, growing up, and even as adults, it's your name. And where that name came from, or why you were given that name, is such an important part of understanding the expectation of who you are. And sometimes if you are named after a parent or a grandparent or somebody else, there already is a life that you are expected to, I won't say completely mirror, but they're asking you to look at that life and say, this is part of who you are. And so you don't, so you end up going through your life kind of looking like, is this a parallel path? Am I on the same path? And then in my case, so I wasn't named for anyone, but Ruschelle and I were just talking about this. When I was growing up, my mother told me, I knew you were going to be a girl, and I knew I was going to name you Bernadette. So I grew up with Bernadette was this special name for me. And Bernadette, I grew up in a Catholic family, so Bernadette was a saint, and she was a saint that as a young girl saw the Blessed Mother. So my idea of who I am, or who I was, particularly as a child, was totally linked to that story. So the family narrative it's unconscious, but the name is one of the most specific points that you can look at to unlock the story of who you are. And it is, as Neville, the name you were given is an early I am assignment. So if you were named for somebody who had died in poverty, or somebody, or an aunt that never married, it's a state of consciousness before you even know what that means. So I want you to think about this question: who were you named after, or named in relation to? And what was their unfinished story? And where might you be unconsciously completing it? Michael?
Thanks, Bernadette. This has been really interesting for me. So my first name seems to have no precursor in the family that I'm aware of. My middle name is named after my step great grandfather, and that already is a red flag telling you that something's gone wrong somewhere. And he was the guy basically who rescued my father from abandonment after his birth family rejected his father. So there's a whole pile of stuff going on, and I'd never really thought of that until we started working through these different lenses. So it's fascinating what comes up. So the second lens that I'd like to look through is the occupational pattern lens. Occupational patterns across a family are very rarely coincidental, and again they are a visible expression of an inherited I am. So what did your parents do? What did their parents do? Are there particular trades or professions? Is there an assumption that you will go to university? Are there literally laws laid down? You will go to university. You will become a doctor. You will become an accountant. And in some families, whether they're high achiever families or sometimes in immigrant families, I remember reading recently about Korean immigrants to America and the pressure that they were under to go to become either a lawyer, a doctor, or an accountant, and immense pressure on them to succeed, whether they like that or not. And our lives are filled with stories of people who end up doing a job that they don't really want to do. And so the family narrative operates as a powerful unconscious constraint on what seems possible. And by the time we actually get to a point in life where we're starting to think about what we might do as an adult, our I am has already been colonized by the family's past. In my case, both my grandfather and my father were engineers. And so I ended up as a software engineer. And my son has just graduated as a software engineer. So you can see these patterns spiraling through the family. Now, in this case, it seems that these have actually been positive, and that's been something that's been helpful for me, and again helpful for my son. But that's not always the case. So when we look back at a family, looking at the record, particularly in Britain here, we can look at census records and we can see the occupations that people listed for themselves. We've actually got a documented record of an inherited I am operating across multiple generations. And so my question to you is, what is that inherited I am in your family with regard to your occupation? And I'd just like to hand over to Ruschelle for the final lens.
Michael, mine is my personal one is very similar to yours. So the lens that we're talking about here is the unmet parental dream lens. And the unmet parental dream is often the most intimate and the most painful. So occupation can be one of those. And however, it doesn't have to be. So our parents have these, I'll never forget my mom, my father was 40 when I was born. So, and then he was 45 when my sister was born. So we had an older dad who was a little bit death focused anyway. He knew he wasn't going to be around a lot, forever with us. And I remember my mom saying once, you know, it's very difficult getting old because sometimes you still have the mentality of a young person and you have all these hopes and dreams and you're just not able to continue to fulfill those. And I was young when she said that to me. She was talking about my father. And she didn't intend to put something on me, right? But in moments of identity formation, when your parents say something like that, and I was already very close to my dad. So, you know, like you, Michael, my dad had a dream of being a successful businessman in certain areas of his life. And my sister and I have both, so real estate was his thing. So my sister and I have both gone into real estate in different forms or another. So that the occupation is a big one. But I think there's another layer too, and it's these unspoken dissatisfactions about life. So when we talk about satisfaction is one of those emotions that is past. Are your parents satisfied? Were they satisfied in your home? And that's something that can be very viscerally felt by a child. Were mom and dad disgruntled with circumstances, or were they comfortable and satisfied? And why I think this is such an interesting point of transmission in generations is because it's a base need to feel satisfied. It's related to food, to sex, to money. Like when we think about feeling grounded and satisfied, if our parents and our grandparents weren't able to have that, that's an unmet need. So we can trace it everything back to the potato famine of literal starvation in Holocaust survivors in Cambodia, you know, these traditional studies, to dad wasn't super satisfied with the fact that he didn't get to fulfill his career path or make it financially the way he wanted. So my question for our listeners, which I love, you know, after we kind of were putting this together, I love the question that I get to share, which is, where in your life are you running hard towards something and feeling no joy when you get there? Whose dream might you actually be chasing? And Michael, this was me to a T. Actually, this year, I just discovered that I was chasing finances in order to compensate for having a community. Yeah. So we'd like for you to take a look at where are you running towards something and still not feeling satisfied. And speaking of satisfaction, it always makes me very satisfied to listen to Bernadette do a centering exercise and a meditation. So Bernadette, I will hand it over to you.
Well, what I would like to share before I begin it is that here we've talked about, if Neville Goddard is still not completely familiar with you, we've given you 3 ways to understand the I am, where first we talked about you know, your name and how that gave you a sense. And then Michael talked about how, you know, how this job, like what he was going to do in his life, you know, almost like already predestined, that he came from engineers, he's going to be an engineer. And then Ruschelle just talking about the when this understanding that whatever your parents are feeling, so in this sense of if they're not feeling that they have had a fulfilled life, that's kind of what you are holding on to in who you are. So it is. So as we go into the meditation, I just wanted you to allow yourself to think about, you know, now that you've got some of these ideas about, you know, and that we've talked about, Neville, we want to step out of our old state and into the new one. And how we do this is through our body. We do it through feeling, because that's where the inherited state has been living. So I'm going to take you through a meditation. So I'm asking you to sit quietly, take 3 slow breaths, and as you're doing this, to bring to mind one inherited I am that emerged from the diagnostic lenses, one role, one pattern, or one expectation that you now recognize is not yours. So name it silently. I have been living as someone else who. Do not judge it, and do not try and release it yet. Simply witness it. Neville taught you cannot step out of a state you have not first recognized. Your ancestors could not recognize theirs, but you can. Acknowledge the ancestors whose state this was. So silently say, this began with you, not with me. I see it now. I honor your struggle. And I am returning this to where it belongs. This is not blame. It is clarity. The state was formed in response to real circumstances your ancestor faced. It was adaptive for them. It is not adaptive for you. So let's do a clearing. With eyes closed, feel the inherited state as physical weight. So whatever you're feeling that has been passed down, let it feel its physical weight, a garment, an atmosphere, maybe a particular quality of heaviness in your body. And notice where it lives. Does it live in your chest, your shoulders, your belly, your pelvis? Now slowly and deliberately, feel it beginning to lift. Not through force, through recognition. The state loses its power when it is seen. Allow yourself to breathe into the places where you have been holding it. And let the breath work. Let the breath do the work. Silently say, I am releasing what was never mine to carry. And now, what do I actually want? Not was I told to want. Not what would repair a parent's grief or complete an ancestor's unfinished story. But what is mine? What is really mine? Let the answer arise without censoring it. It may be small. It may be surprising. It may be something you have dismissed as an impossible or that is self-indulgent. Now, following Neville precisely, Do not affirm it as a future desire. Step into it as a present state. Feel after it in consciousness until you feel yourself to be it. I am the way. Consciousness is the way through which manifestations of life pass into the world of form. Things have no reality other than in consciousness. Therefore, when you get the consciousness first, what you desire is compelled to appear. So let's remain in this state for 2 minutes. Breathe, feel. Do not reach for it. Inhabit it. This is the I am reclamation, not a new affirmation layered over an unexamined inherited state, but a genuine assumption of the authentic self, felt, embodied, and therefore real. When you are ready, come back to the room.
Thank you, Bernadette. So just to wrap up, Neville said the world is yourself pushed out. We just want to encourage you today that you determine who that self actually is. If you'd like support along your journey of ancestral healing combined with some really powerful Neville Goddard teachings, please reach out to us, ancestralhealingcenter.com, or support@ancestralhealingcenter.com. We'll see you soon.